So we are going to just basically check out how we can actually use Pyversity Playground in order to kind of carry out or basically write a Python program. So Pyversity Playground actually requires a specific format in which a code has to be written. So we'll just try to understand how this format actually works. So we're going to just use a very small example where we are just going to have a number and we are going to multiply that number by a certain value, and then we are just going to display the result. Okay. So typically any Python program will actually look like this. It will have an input, which in this case happens to be the number. Then there's going to be a computation or logic. In this case, it's going to be multiplying that number with 5. And then finally, there's going to be an output where we actually display or print the result. So let's start with the input. We do something like num equal to 100. So that's the input. We are initializing a number with the value 100. Now next step would be that we actually want to carry out a computation. So we want to implement a logic. So the logic in this case would be that I just want to multiply the number by 5. The way we do it is product equal to number multiplied by 5. So star in Python is basically the operation for multiplication. We are going to see this later as well, but this is just to kind of show you that how we are going to translate this into the playground. Finally comes the output where we are just going to print, and we just write num over here. Sorry, we are just going to write product over here, which is the answer. So initially the number is 100. We multiply it by 5 and then we display the result. So we expect that the output should be 500. If I run this in Google Colab, I see that the output happens to be 500. So now how are we going to actually write the same program in Python Playground? So let's go to the playground. So we notice that there is a problem which is called write a function multiply by 5 num that takes a number num, multiplies it by 5 and returns the result. So it's kind of the same as we have seen before, that there is an input which happens to be num. There's a computation which is basically multiplying by 5, and finally there's an output, okay, where we were printing the number. Now when we want to write this in Python Playground, what we have to do is specify it in terms of a function. We haven't discussed function yet, and we are going to discuss function in more details later on, but this is just like an brief idea as to how you can write functions in Pyversity Playground. So in this playground, what we are seeing is it says something like write a function multiply by 5 num. The way we write a function is we are just going to put a keyword called def. Okay, def stands for basically define. Then we are going to put a space after def, and after that we are just going to write the function name exactly as shown over here. So it says multiply underscore by underscore 5. So we'll write exactly like that. Then we have a open first bracket, we write num over there, and then we write closed first bracket. So exactly what it says over here, multiply by 5 num, we are just going to write that same thing. Now then we put a colon over here and we hit the enter key. The moment we hit the enter key, we are going to go to the next line over here, and what you have to do is basically indent it. So we can indent it by using the tab space. There is a tab key on your computer. You can use that. Now you can either also use spaces if you want, specifically something like 4 spaces, but I will recommend that you use the tab. If you want to use spaces, as I said, use 4 spaces, but remember, make sure that you always use 4 spaces or something like that. All right, so I'm using tab over here. Now once we press the tab, we are now going to write the logic. Remember, the logic was something like product equal to num times 5. So this function multiply by 5, that takes the input which is num, Then over here we are just going to write the logic, product equal to num times 5. And then finally what we are going to do is we are going to write something called return, which says returns the result. That means we are just going to return product over here. So we are just returning the result that we obtain after multiplying by 5. Once we have written this code, what we are going to do is we are just going to scroll and we are going to press the submit button. The moment we press the submit button, it says something like you submit a solution for this problem at so and so time, passed all test cases, and then it says solved over here, and notice that we cannot submit anymore. So once you have successfully computed a playground problem and submitted it, you're going to get a message that looks like this in green, which will say that your test cases has passed, so that means your solution is correct. And once your solution is correct, you notice that you won't be able to submit it anymore. Okay, so this is how we typically are going to write playground Python programs in form of a function. Now over here the function takes only one input. So what if we want to have multiple inputs? How do we do that? So we are going to look at another example of that sort. So let's look at this example over here. It says area of rectangle. So it says something like write a function called area rect with length and breadth that accepts two numbers, length and breadth, and returns the area of the rectangle. So let's see how this will happen in the Google Colab world. So we go back to Colab, and let's say I want to compute the area of a rectangle. Maybe the length of the rectangle happens to be 50. Maybe the breadth of the rectangle happens to be 20. Now we know that the area is computed as length times breadth. So we are going to do area equals to length multiplied by breadth. And then finally, we are just going to print the area over here. So once again, notice that there's an input, length equal to 50. There's another input, breadth equal to 20. Then there is the computation step over here, area equal to length times breadth multiplied by breadth. And then finally, we print the area. Now we expect the area is going to be 1000, 50 times 20, run it. And we notice that we are getting the output as 1000. So this is what happens in Colab. Now, how do I transform this to playground? Remember, we are going to again start with def. Then we are going to write this function and the inputs exactly as shown over here. So we are going to write area underscore rect length comma breadth. After that, remember, we put a colon and then hit an enter, which will give us a indentation tab, right? So here's the function, we have the input, and now what we are going to do is basically write the logic, write the computation. The computation was area equal to length times breadth, and then finally we are going to return area, which is basically the output. So this is what it's supposed to happen. We will have this function with the input, length and breadth, computation over here, finally the output written with a return. Okay. Now, just to kind of show you what happens if we don't do these things correctly, let's say instead of writing the function as area underscore rect, I write it as area underscore rectangle. And then what I do is I try to submit. If I submit, then what happens is I am getting an error. It says security violation, function area not found, which means that playground is expecting something like area underscore rect, and we do not have that over here. We are not providing it correctly, and that's why it does not work. So we have to provide the function name exactly as described over here. Okay, so you cannot use different letter cases. Similarly, for the def, you cannot use like capital D or something like that. You have to write it exactly as shown over here. Now this one accepts two parameters, length and breadth. What if I add another parameter? Maybe I do something like height. Now what will happen then? We'll try to run it again. And this time it says runtime error, missing one positional argument height. So that means that Python playground is expecting 2 inputs, but we are trying to provide it 3 inputs, and that's why it doesn't work. So exactly as shown over here, so we shouldn't have height. Now what if I compute the area in a different way? If I don't follow the proper logic, I mean the area of a rectangle is supposed to be length times breadth. What if I do something like 2 times breadth or something like that? Now what happens over here? If I try to run this piece of code, it says something like test case failed. So that means what's happening is our logic has not been correctly written. Okay, I mean the area of a rectangle is ultimately supposed to be length multiplied by breadth, but we are doing an incorrect logic over here, and that's why Python playground is not accepting it. So only when everything works correctly and the logic has been written correctly will playground accept this code. So if I write it like this and then I submit, it will says all test cases passed, and then the solution will be submitted. It will be shown in green and you cannot submit it anymore. As I said before, once you have submitted it correctly, then further submissions are not allowed. So this is exactly how we will transform any code into Python playground. As I said before, we haven't discussed writing functions or some operations over here, but as the course progresses, we will discuss how to write this and more details will come up. But for the time being, you can use this video of what I have discussed here to essentially transform the logic that you are going to run into Python playground, and you can actually code up in Python playground as well.